Okay, folks, chapter 20. We are going to be looking at late medieval and early Renaissance in Northern Europe. And your years for this is going to be 1395 to 1500 CE. 1395 to 1500 CE. And what's going to be happening here in Northern Europe during this medieval transitional period into sometimes what we term as proto-Renaissance, P-R-O-T-O, which is kind of like saying pre, like the preparation, kind of like a prototype to what the Renaissance is going to look like. We're going to have French ducal courts. We're going to have a multitude of different kind of components and regional focuses of artistry. And one is what's going to be called the French ducal courts. Then we're going to look at Flanders, and then we're going to look at late Flemish artists, painters in particular, which is Flanders as well. Flanders is going to be a big epicenter of activities for this transitional period into the Renaissance in Northern Europe. And then the last we're going to look at is the Holy Roman Empire. And during this time, know that the Holy Roman Empire is mostly present-day Germany and Belgium. And then it's part or half of Italy, and then the Papal States, which is going to be based off of Rome and the papacy, and that of Catholicism is going to have its own section as well. And you can kind of see that in regards to the map, map 20.1. You can see that the Holy Roman Empire stops just northwest of Rome in Italy, and that's what is going to be deemed as the Papal States. And you can see that there's the Ottoman Empire that has made its way all the way into Eastern Europe, just south of Hungary. Then you have the Papal States, which again is going to be the focus on Catholicism that's occurring in Italy at this time. The Holy Roman Empire, which is mostly going to be Germany, Belgium, all the way up into southern parts of Norway, Denmark. Then you have the French ducal courts, which is going to be there mostly in blue. Some of the little pockets inside of the French in the France area. And then Flanders itself is going to be that center darker brown section, which is more present-day Belgium, up to the top northwestern area of Europe just before it becomes the English Canal over to England, where London is. So that's where Flanders. So that area, if you look at Flanders in particular, it's in a very important location whenever it comes to sea trade. You can see it can go northeast, it can go straight north to England, it can go down through the English Canal to the west, back around to the side of France, all the way down to Spain. So it's a very important harbor for maritime and mercantile trade. And because of this mercantile trade, that's going to increase the artistry in this area. So the more, and this goes all the way back to Paleolithic period, the more time you have to not have to overly work, the more time you have to make art. And so that's essentially what's happening here, is that these areas are going to become very rich. And when they become rich from trade, then there's going to be more time for developing cultural growth and artistic activities in the area. And Flanders is really going to be the epicenter of all of this during this late medieval and early Renaissance period in Northern Europe. Okay? So let's start with the French ducal courts, and we're going to look at an artist in particular by the name of Schluter. And Schluter is going to be developing a sculpture, and we're going to look at Well of Moses from the Chartreux de Champeaux in Dijon, France, and it's going to be figure 20.2. And it's called the Well of Moses. And he's also going to create more jamb and portal sculptures, which we'll look at here in just a second as well. But the two really important things that Schluter is going to be bringing back and revitalizing during this time, because remember that the Renaissance, Renaissance, is literally means the rebirth of antiquity. And antiquity is Greek Roman art, classical art. Anything from the end of the Roman time all the way up until now is considered medieval. And then there are different high points, like the Gothic period, which is a high medieval period, right? Just before it dwindles out into this um, early Renaissance period. And so, what artists like Sluter are going to be doing is they're going to be revitalizing those old Greek and Roman techniques. We slowly started saw it. We slowly started to see it happen in Art History 141 with the use of some of the niche sculptures that were built in the Gothic cathedrals. We also saw it with Charlemagne. We also saw it with who else? The Ottonians. So it was slowly coming back, like during the Romanesque period, where they were starting to bring more Romanesque, like figurative sculptures back, like the one of King David during the Gothic period as well. It was slowly coming back, but it was still very flat and very disjointed. And now we're going to start to get more actual animation, movement, displacement of weight on the hip, and activity and action, and all this kind of kinetics and animation is going to start to come back into the sculptural work. And artists like Klaus Sluter is going to be one of those. So what he's going to do is going to bring back two main features. One, he's going to bring back the life-size figure. Life-size figure. So the Well of Moses, these are life-size characters. They're orthodox biblical figures. So the Christian theme is still very present. We're not going to go back to polytheistic multiple gods like the Greeks and Romans had. We're going to keep with the biblical orthodox attention to narration and story with these sculptures and also with the paintings. But it's going to be encompassing the techniques that the Greeks and Romans did with their sculptures of their gods and their athletes and prominent features in their societies. Okay, so it's kind of a synthesis between the two. So the life-size figure is going to come back, like with the Romans and what the Greeks did. And then more of the portrait-like features. And where did we see portrait-like features in Art History 141? We saw that in the verism of the Roman art. Verism, verism, which is super realism in the face and super realism in the overall features of the body. Okay? And we're going to see that in the Well of the Moses. So when you see figure 20.2, Well of Moses, I want you to be able to talk about how they're life-size figures coming back and also the portrait-like features. And you can also discuss the use of the organic drapery and know the difference between organic drapery and modeled drapery. Organic drapery is when the drapery is actually moving based off of the desired motion of the appendages underneath of it, the arms, the legs, everything. That's organic drapery. The drapery moves based off of the movement of the arms. So however he or she or the artist wants to portray the movement and animation of the body, the drapery will follow. Versus that of model drapery, which Well of Moses has kind of both. Okay, the model drapery is going to be where it's the stone is going to be cut in a way to create patterns and kind of abstract lines that really don't match with the movement of the body underneath of it. So it's more of a superficial modeling. It has its own existence other than the body that's under it. Okay, so organic drapery is dictated upon the movement of the body under it. Model drapery is dictated by itself, placed on top of the body. All right. So the jams that we see with Sluter is Virgin and Child, Saints and Donors, the portal of the chapel of Chartreuse. So again, this is the Chartreuse des Chapons in Dijon, and figure 20.2a. And if you remember from Art 141, during the Gothic period, these jams became very important. They were what are called caryatids, Carytids. And the and it's okay if you didn't do Art History 141. I'm assuming some of you have, but I'm just giving you the information now just give you a point of review and reference. So it's okay if you didn't have it, you're getting it now. So it's not going to affect you by any means. But these jamb sculptures were called these caryatids, which were engaged columns that had figurative forms carved out of the pillar or out of the column shaft. And that's what we see here. As you can see, the column shaft starts, it goes up, and then it suddenly carves out this imagery of this biblical figure, and then it continues up on the top before it creates a pointed arch. And that pointed arch was something that came from that Gothic period, where it wasn't a continuous barrel arch, it actually stopped at a point, right? It was a very tech-savvy decision to give more ambience and space to the overall framing using these pointed arch systems. So that's what a caryatid is, this jamb. This jamb is where it's a series of symmetrical images of figures before you get to the doorway, which is the portal, called a portal, that enters into the cathedral, all right, or into the chapel or into the church. So that's what the jamb is, J-A-M-B. And the column is called an engaged column, which means that it's part of the wall. It's not separate from. A column in the round is one that's completely free of anything behind it or next to it. It's in the round 360 degrees. Versus these engaged columns, they're only about half engaged, and the other half is the wall itself. All right? So that's the difference between an engaged column and that of a column in the round. All right, let's see how we're doing on time. Okay. Now, what I want to look at during this French Ducal Court time, remember we're going to talk about each section. Right now we're in the French Ducal Courts, so focusing in France and Flanders and such, and just southwest of Flanders. We're going to talk about manuscript paintings. And what's really important about these manuscript paintings, let me see, where do we want to start? We're going to look at, here we go. We're going to look at the Limburg brothers in particular, starting on figure 20.6. Now remember, it would take a whole semester to cover everything just dealing with medieval and Renaissance art. It would take 17 weeks. So we're trying to really abbreviate and give you the highlights of these time periods during this this incredible, wonderful, intense 4-week course, or however long it ends up being. 4 weeks, right? Yeah. So these manuscript paintings, what we're going to look at in particular is in figure 20.6 to begin, and they're going to have certain elements to it. One is they're going to be illusionistic. Okay, illusionistic. The second is they're going to have illumination to them. So there's going to be an interest in creating more illumination. And I'm going to talk about how each of these are used in these manuscript paintings in particular. The third is the influence of the Duke of Berry, who's part of one of these French Ducal courts, and how he's the main contributor to these new manuscript types of paintings. And then, of course, the Limburg brothers themselves. And what's interesting about the Limburg brothers is that they collaborated. And they worked together to focus on the illusionistic and illuminated qualities of these paintings. And it's not quite certain like what brother worked on what and what brother worked on the other, but there were 3 of them. You can see in figure 20.6 next to the Limburg brothers, you can see Paul, Herman, and Jean. Those are the 3 brothers that worked on these paintings. So it's cool in that we're seeing a collaboration start to develop with artists. Before, it was either anonymous and you didn't know who was working on the art, or it was just one specific individual artist. But in this case, we're starting to see collaboration, which is great because it's actually going to set up in, as we get closer to the Renaissance, like we are now, competitions and collaborations and competitions between master artist and student artist, and then the student artist becomes a master artist, and then suddenly he's competing with it against his teacher, and it's going to be really cool stuff like Brunelleschi and Ghiberti, and you're going to start to see that. So this is kind of a precursor to some of this collaboration, as well as these competitions between who's going to actually get the commission for the artwork. One thing I do want to mention real quick during this time, it's less about really getting money from selling your art and more about notoriety and fame. It's kind of like, gosh, I hate to use this example, but I think it's a good one. It's fair. Um, the Kardashians is they don't really have talent, but they're very well recognized publicly. They're very famous, but they don't have a lot of talent. So no, I'm not saying that the art here isn't talent. There's no talent here. It's just like it's more about the fame aspect and how the money comes from being famous later than about making money right away and then becoming famous. So it's kind of like that. The Kardashians were they had a little bit of money, of course, but then they became popular and famous on TV, and then they became very wealthy because of that. So it was the fame first. So that's what's happening during this time. It's about the fame and the notoriety first. And then once they become famous, then of course they get more and more commissions, and then the money starts to come in. Okay, so we're going to look at January and October. And this one, figure 20.6, is October. All right? And what's happening here is that it's the outside of the Louvre. And the Louvre is actually the place of residency for Duke of Berry. So that present-day Louvre museum that's in Paris was the residential grounds of the Duke of Berry in France. Okay? So what we see in figure 20.6 in the background, the architectural residency, that's the Louvre. That's what was the residency of the Duke of Berry, which is the present-day museum, the Louvre, which is really interesting. So we see in this imagery the outside of the Louvre, which is where the Duke lived. And it's the peasants, and they're sewing, and they're working, and they seem content. So let me read off a couple things about the overall allegorical mood of October. All right, so again, this one in particular is called October. They're working in front of the Louvre, all right, which was the king's residence, and I just mentioned that. And it shows contentment of their master, all right. So that's the illusionistic aspect of the painting, is it shows them constantly in content. They're not bothered. They're not unaffected emotionally. They're doing their jobs, and it's creating this illusion. And what an illusion can be is at different percentages, right? You can have a 10% illusion where it's like they appear 10% of the time content, but actually 90% of the time they're disgruntled. So in this case, it's that illusionary factor where the painting is depicting that they're always content, even though I'm sure that there were times they were like, I'm not throwing these seeds out on these grounds, I'm not sowing this harvest, I'm not going to do that for him. But it's to portray, the brothers are trying to portray that the peasants or the workers are actually satisfied with their master and their ownership and the work that they're doing for him. And another thing that it's showing in October is naturalism. Okay, and we're seeing the naturalism with the architecture and the use of convincing shadows of the people and the objects. And that is the illumination. So if you remember, I talked about with these manuscript paintings, we have illusionistic and we have illumination. And then also the Duke of Berry. All right, he's kind of the center focal point of these paintings. So the illusionistic is the contentment, and the illumination is the use of these shadows, the naturalism of what it looks like when light is starting to be casted upon a figure. Because if we look back in the medieval, the Gothic, the medieval, all the way back to antiquity, the images that we saw during that time after the Roman Empire were flat. There was no casted shadows, none of that. Okay, it was very flat, like light was always on the figures, and that was a very spiritual decision, is to show light constantly casted on these biblical figures, or these individuals that were supposed to represent biblical parables and narratives. But here it's about showing a light source and the shadow that is coming upon the light source. So the light source coming in on October is from the left. Okay, and you can see that the shadow casted of the man that's sewing the seats to the far right is moving in the opposite direction. There's a casted shadow coming off of the horse, and then even all the way back in the background with the scarecrow and the center field, there's shadows being casted as well if you zoom in. All right, you can see the shadow casted on the right side of the Louvre as well. It's a little bit darker. So he's creating this interest in, or they, not he, they, all three of them, are creating this level of illumination. All right, so it's a big deal. And then we can take a look at figure 20.5. Sorry, I should have done 0.5 before 0.6. But anyway, just jump back one slide and look at January. Okay, and again, you can see that it's the brothers, all three of them, Paul, Herman, and Jean. And this one's titled January. And we're seeing now the banquet, the inside of the Louvre, what's going on inside. And one thing I didn't mention is the barrel arch, the hemispherical arch, which is showing astronomy and the placement of the stars and arrangements in the sky, which is right above the imagery. So this is what the sky looks like in January. And figure 20.6 is October, and it shows you what the astronomy looks like in the sky, astronomy and astrology, I believe, in the sky in October. So that's what that hemispherical shape is up on the top, which looks architectural in nature, but it is a constellational arrangement. So again, showing naturalism, showing a focus on what's going on in the world around you, and even to the point of this cosmic understanding of the arrangement of the stars during January and October. So that's what we call naturalism. Naturalism, when you're starting to bring elements of the real world into the paintings and into the artwork. It's going to be very big during the Renaissance. So what's happening in January here, figure 20.5, is, again, it's the banquet scene on the inside, and the Duke of Berry is present, and he is the figure where everyone is facing. So if you look to the right, bottom right, behind the table, there's a man in blue, almost looks like peacock feathers, that are enveloping his body. That's the Duke of Berry. Okay, that's the Duke of Berry. And he's the focal point. Some figures are looking the same direction as he, but there are often individuals that are trying to be his representatives. So his representatives, to allow people into this banquet, are looking the same direction as he, and everybody else is looking towards him. So he's the focal point, but his representatives, looking in the same direction as he, are also his extensions, if you will, of visual control and visual dominance in the painting. So let me break down January for you. So it's the Duke surrounded by a halo. So if you see that white, that looks like it could be part of his chair or the background, that is intentionally designed to make it look like he has this effulgence or this halo. All right, that is part of the illusionistic aspect. The illusionistic. So it's an illusion. They're alluding with this illusion of a halo behind the Duke of Berry, kind of giving him that, slight, divine king on earth like position that they used to do all the way back in Mesopotamia times, and further back than that. Another illusion is the Great Spatial Recession. So it looks as if there is a lot of depth here based off of the architecture that is surrounding the Duke of Berry, and it's alluding to the fact that it is going far back into the distance, where these people are entering in the top left back into this kind of atmospheric landscape. So it's alluding to the depth and the size of the Louvre without actually constructing the overall palace, because if you look at figure 20.6, you can see how large the Louvre really is. So they're going to try to take that concept of magnanimous architectural size, and they're going to transfer it to an interior space in figure 20.5, which is January. So that is also an illusion, to create an illusion of spatial recession, meaning from foreground to middle ground to background. And both of these manuscript paintings have that. They have a foreground, they have a background, the middle ground, and they have a background. Here with January, the foreground is the Duke himself with the banquet table. Then the middle ground is on the architecture, which is behind him to create that spatial recession. And then the background is the landscape where the invitees are coming in from the top left. So you can see even more of spatial recession with architecture up to the top left, where you can see the side of another section of the Louvre that's going back at an angle, trying to create some level of perspective. Again, these are naturalisms. These are using illusion and illumination to create this naturalism, an empirical observation based off of the real world around you, as well as the real world above you, because that's the use of the astronomy that's above to create that hemispherical design. Yeah, and another one of the, this one, January, is more about illusionistic and not illumination. The other one is more about illumination. So this interior is going to be more about illusionistic. And the sheer volume of folks that we see, like almost completely clustering the composition with figures, is something that was used all the way back to late antiquity, but also like with the mosaics back then, but also creating the sense of richness and augmenting the space with a whole bunch of people that are coming to show their homage and support to the Duke of Berry. So increasing his richness based off how famous he is with the sheer number of individuals there, and of course his philanthropy of giving out all this banquet food to all of his attendants at the banquet. All right, so that's another illusion, is to increase and to show his richness based off the augmentation of sheer numbers of people in this composition, that clustering effect of individuals. All right. Now this chapter is going to be pretty in-depth, and the next several chapters are going to be pretty in-depth, so I'm going to have to break up multiple videos into these chapters. So at this point I'll leave you at that, and then the next video we'll get into Flanders, and we'll talk about the Flanders, the beginning of the Flemish painters and artists, and then we'll move into the late Flemish, and then from there we'll go into the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, talk to you soon.